Hello and welcome to our very first weekly security nerd out. Goal for this is we're going to pick a topic every week. We're going to do a little bit of a nerd out on it and just see where it goes. So this week we have a new Microsoft Exchange vulnerability, actually two to be specific. Now, there's been a lot of interest around this, a lot of noise, and so the goal for today is really to dig into that and just try to cut through it. So we'll first start with what the attack methodology is because I love that stuff. So what we see first happening is that an attacker is sending a malicious web request with the exploit inside of that. Now, when it's successfully exploited, and we'll dig into that in a second, it's going to result in the installation of something called a China Chopper web shell. Now, we'll pull this back a little bit. A web shell is just a web page that gets installed on a web server and allows the attacker to interact with it. Now, the attackers can make that be whatever they want it to be. But at the end of the day, it's essentially going to allow the full compromise of that system. It's going to act as an entry point into the environment for the attacker. So what what we're seeing for this one in particular is once the attackers are able to compromise that system, they start doing internal reconnaissance. So they're going to start collecting information on users, systems, and just get a lay of the land. Once they have an idea there, they'll do some additional credential dumping, try to escalate their privileges, and that's going to facilitate some lateral movement, meaning that they're going to log into other systems in the environment. Now, for this particular attack, what security researchers are seeing right now is that it's data exfiltration, meaning that once the attackers are in the environment, they're logging into these systems, they're looking for data, they're going to steal that and then do whatever they need to do for that. Now, the interesting thing with this one is that it is attributed back to a nation state. And it's not very surprising because this vulnerability is just an offshoot of some of vulnerabilities from last year that, again, were attributed to a nation state, specifically China. So there's a lot of buzz around this right now, and a lot of people are worried. But right now, and this is the big caveat here is right now, there's not a lot of activity with this because it's been fairly confined. While this is a 0 day, meaning that the vulnerability hasn't been publicly released yet, Microsoft has observed fewer than 10 organizations globally that have been impacted by this. Now, that's a pretty good number. There's other consulting shops that are out there that are saying there could be more. There's definitely activity happening, but this is not a widespread event as of right now. And let's dig into why that is. In order to exploit this vulnerability, there's got to be two conditions that are met. Number one, it's got to be an on-premise Microsoft Exchange server running what's called Outlook Web Access. That's basically just the webmail version for Exchange. That means that it's server on site. So a lot of companies today, they're shifting over to Microsoft Office 365, but you still have a lot of larger companies that are running their own Exchange servers locally. Not really all that crazy. Now, the other part of this that's required, and this is the most important, is that it does require legitimate user credentials for an email user. The reason that's important is because an attacker can't just go and scan the entire internet trying to exploit every single Exchange server that's out there. Now, this is a little bit different than some of the ProxyShell vulnerabilities from last year, where that wasn't the case. They could do this as an unauthenticated user. So you could see where this race condition happened, where attackers were scanning the entire internet looking for on-premise Microsoft Exchange servers so they can exploit that and get access into it. So not the case this time. They have to have legitimate user credentials to do that. It's a low barrier to entry. You can phish people. You can look at stolen credentials that are out there. So it's not saying that this can't become something more, but there is another layer that is needed in order to exploit this. And so I'm not expecting to see mass exploitation like we did with some of the ProxyShell vulnerabilities, but expect it to be more targeted in nature. And we'll dig into a little bit of that in just a second here. So in terms of mitigations, at the time, right now, Microsoft does not have a patch. That's going to change in the next couple of days, I would imagine. So there are some very easy things to do to mitigate this. There's some blocking rules that you can put in place on the Exchange server itself that will block the exploit from being able to run. You've got some PowerShell ports. This is one of the things that's required for the exploit to work. You can shut those down. And then again, once the patch is released, make sure you get that patch. Just easy, get it done, and we'll move on with our lives from this vulnerability. The one thing that's really important to keep in mind is you want to make sure that you're resetting credentials if you've had an attack. And the reason why this is important is because one of those prerequisites for the vulnerability here is that an attacker has to have user credentials for an email account. When an attacker is going to get into the environment, they're going to dump credentials. And so they'll almost automatically get those credentials. And so if you're going, hand-to-hand combat with the attackers here, trying to kick them out of the environment, and you don't reset all of the user credentials, well, now they have a way to get back into the environment, at least until that patch is made there. So standard practice during any type of compromise, do a reset of any user accounts that were impacted, especially if the attackers get all of the accounts, reset all of those. But just make sure that you're going that extra mile. If you do have any type of incident now, get those user accounts reset and you'll be a little bit safer. So the TLDR on this is, yeah, it's a bad vulnerability. It can result in the compromise of the system, but we're not going to be looking at some mass exploitation event like we did with ProxyShell. So we got a little bit of time for the defenders to get in there, get these mitigations in place, and patch those systems when that patch comes out. So overall, not too bad, but still something to pay attention to. And we'll just wait for the next vulnerability on these on-premise Exchange servers to come around and deal with that next one at that point. All right. That's it for the weekly nerd out for this week. Stay tuned. We're going to do this every week moving forward and just see where it goes from here.